their theory is refuted. Okay, so in other words, their theory that petroleum comes from carbon deposits that formed at the beginning of the Earth, right? From the formation of the Earth, is the source of petroleum today. That's where petroleum came from. And they're saying, no, that cannot be true. Petroleum did not come from those carbon deposits because in petroleum we find biomarkers which tell us what? There was living organisms at one time or living organisms now. If you have living organisms in petroleum, does that mean that it did not come from carbon deposits?
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily. Sure, maybe that's evidence that it came from plants and whatever, but it could just be the case that you have living things in carbon deposits. That's where answer choice D comes in. Certain strains of bacteria thrive deep inside the Earth's crust. They could explain the biomarkers. Yes?
Okay, so I picked that and that makes sense, but I'm confused about, the only reason why I got that is because I knew that maybe this is like a common, don't you have to know what classifies as bacteria, otherwise you would just include it as plant and animal matter? What if you didn't know that? Because otherwise it would, like the bottom thing is saying like there needs to be living organisms, and if you equate bacteria with a living organism, which would be fair to do if you hadn't taken like, you know, that doesn't seem like common, I don't know, like, if I didn't know that, which I almost forgot, I wouldn't have gotten it.
Yeah, I don't know. When I saw bacteria, I thought of something moving around that's gross. And I thought that sounds like a living organism.
So the options are either it's fossilized remains, or
No, that it's a living organism, or that it's a plant animal.
yeah, that's the biomarkers. But when they're talking about the oil, they're talking about like fossilized remains of it, and these are talking about like bacteria that are like alive today. So I thought they were talking like, cause I understand what you're saying, which is like, well, don't you have to know that bacteria are them? But these bacteria are not fossilized bacteria that are deep in the earth. They're just bacteria that exist today, right?
Maybe, or that they were there in the past.
Yeah, certain strains thrive deep inside the Earth's crust, so they're there now.
Oh.
But that could explain the biomarkers because the biomarkers indicate the past or present existence of living organisms.
Yeah. Because they know that bacteria is a living organism, but then we know fulfill your question.
Was your concern whether bacteria is a living organism?
No.
What was your
I know
concern?
that it is. It's that it doesn't seem like it seems like external knowledge to say that plants and animals do not qualify as bacteria.
I think it's fossilized remains of it.
Okay.
More than
Plants
the
and
fact that it's
animals.
plants and animals.
Huh. I'm not sure how that's relevant. Well, I guess I'm
Because
not.
then it wouldn't count as, then it wouldn't weaken the argument.
I thought it supported the argument also.
Okay, make your case to why you think it supported it.
Yeah, so I assumed that bacteria and plants and animals were all the same thing.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
And
So if you
and
have
then-
plants and animals, if you have bacteria, then you must have plants and
Yeah,
animals?
that's what I'm saying.
Oh.
no, I thought that it supported because it says
But
that
they're not
plants and
deep
animals
in-
are found deep in the Earth's crust, and I saw, and bacteria is deep in the Earth's crust, and petroleum, so that supports the petroleum thing, so that supports this argument.
Yeah, that's a better, yeah.
So you're saying that because there's bacteria there must be plants and animals.
Well, I just thought that they were all the same group.
Ah, okay. So when you hear bacteria, you're thinking that's
Live
a plant.
thing.
A live thing. That's an animal. Got
That's
it.
what I'm saying.
Yeah,
Oh.
I agree. I thought it was too big a leap. I didn't choose that one specifically because I knew what you knew, but I was like, that's way too big a leap to make that they're different.
Yeah, because it's external.
Oh.
Yeah.
But they're not
Wait.
fossilized. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
That's why I'm confused. Like I understand what you're saying. But that's not fossil. They're not fossilized bacteria deep in the Earth's crust.
Yeah, but I don't see why that's relevant. Like, I understand why fossils are relevant to this, but
Well, they could have thrived in the past.
yeah. And if you read this and you say, oh, it had bacteria in it, so that supports this when you're trying to weaken this. If you read
Well, so it all comes down to this. If you're thinking that if you have bacteria there, then you have to have plants and animals.
then you could, and then it
Or
wouldn't
if you have
weaken
plants and animals, then you have bacteria.
Well, I don't disagree that you could, but the issue is whether that requires you to have plants and animals.
How does this weaken the argument?
Well, what it suggests is that the biomarkers are there because bacteria is there, not
biomarkers are where?
because
The biomarkers are where?
in the petroleum. So basically what happens is we have petroleum now, right? We look at it and we say, oh, there's biomarkers. So there must have been living organisms either now or in the past. And so that's the argument against the idea that petroleum came from these coal deposits, or carbon deposits, right? Instead, it must have come from plants and fossilized plants and animals because it has these living things in it.
Yeah.
But just because petroleum has living things in it doesn't necessarily mean that it itself was created from living things. Like, it itself may have come from carbon deposits that also just happen to have living material in it. And what answer choice D does is it says, yeah, there's actually some bacteria in there right now, and maybe that's why we're seeing these biomarkers.
Question. Whose argument are we trying to refute? Because they're talking about, so there's this
We're
one
trying-
theory,
so the geologist
and then
is
there's
making-
these other scientists that don't like that theory. So then, but their theory. So like, what theory are we
Okay,
talking
so
about?
the argument starts out by talking about geologists, right?
Yeah.
Geologist is telling us what other people think. These
Yeah.
other people think
That
that petroleum comes from carbon deposits
yes.
that started the formation of the earth. And this person says, no, this they're wrong. Why are they wrong? Because we have biomarkers in petroleum. And we're trying to weaken that argument that these people are wrong.
Okay.
So we're trying to help support the idea to some extent that maybe it really did come from carbon deposits.
Yeah. Okay. Got it.
Now, the main piece of evidence used against the carbon deposits argument is that petroleum has living things in it, or did at some time. And what answer choice D says is, well, hey, there's bacteria in there right now. Maybe that's why we're seeing biomarkers, not because it came from fossilized plants or animals. Now, D does not disprove the conclusion in any way, shape, or form. It just raises another explanation for the biomarkers and thus weakens the idea that those biomarkers must be there because petroleum came from fossilized plants and animals. So if, Claire, it sounds to me like you're thinking that if something has bacteria, then it must have plants and animals. Therefore, this
It's
would...
not, it's, I don't know how to describe this. It's that the way that you're describing the answer makes sense to me, but only with the knowledge that bacteria and plants and animals are not the same thing.
They are not the same thing.
And then also that
I know that. But that's the only way that this makes sense, and that's external knowledge. That's what I'm confused about.
Yeah, I don't know that that's... that doesn't seem like
I mean,
How
I'm
would
bad at
too,
biomarkers
science, so
too
maybe
much
I'm
of a
confused.
stretch to me.
Yeah, okay, yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, Niall?
Yeah, so I thought that this answer choice D actually strengthened the argument because the argument itself, that last sentence, the geologist says that, but the theory is refuted by the presence in petroleum of biomarkers, molecules indicating the past or present existence of a living organism. So I didn't think, so I thought that, any living organism that was present in a biomarker, or that was present in petroleum, would support his argument. Right?
No, because the assumption here
Right,
is
and
that
I didn't pick up on the assumption because
Yeah.
I was just looking at the argument.
it supports the fact that there are biomarkers there, but we're not trying to support the fact that there's biomarkers there. We're accepting that as true. We're trying to
Right.
use that as evidence that the petroleum came from fossilized animals
So
rather than from some other source.
I was thrown off by the fact that he only references any living organism in the argument, but then he just assumes that we're talking about specifically plant and animal living organisms,
That's right. That's
Yeah.
the problem.
right?
Yeah. It could be some other living organism such as bacteria.
Okay.
Okay, now, was anyone tempted by answer choice A? Okay, so this is kind of like this is almost like a false contrapositive sort of thing. Fossils that have been discovered that are devoid of biomarkers. So, if what this is saying is, you can be a living thing and not have a biomarker. That doesn't mean, though, that if you have a biomarker, you're not necessarily a living thing. It might be the case that every time you have a biomarker, you have a living thing, but sometimes living things don't have biomarkers. Right?
And
Morgan?
also, my problem was that I was reading the last sentence so fast that I read it as the presence of petroleum in biomarkers, and then I just like skimmed over. I know, and I realized.
Okay,
like,
Morgan,
the
you're
whole-
going too fast.
the whole like justification I was trying to make, like after I read it again, I was like, oh, never mind.
Okay.
But
Kaylin, you had a thought?
I think if there's still a question, I think like visually,
Mm-hmm.
I like mapped out. I don't know. If sometimes when I write down, I can't see, but like if you're saying the options are carbon or they're fossils, right?
Mhm.
Those are the two options.
Yep.
Fossils have biomarkers, so we say it's true. If carbon also had biomarkers, that would weaken it. And that's why D is right. It says that the carbon could have biomarkers in it. The bacteria gets in it.
Yeah.
And for me, like that's how they work together versus it being like external knowledge. Exactly.
Yeah.
Great. Answer choice B seems like this either does nothing or maybe strengthens the original argument. Answer choice C, same problem. Anyone tempted by E? Okay. Do you know why this is wrong? Some carbon deposits were formed from the fossilized remains of plants.
Well, because it doesn't talk about biomarkers, I guess.
Well, part of the problem is there may be other carbon deposits that were not,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Oh, yeah.
And so this doesn't necessarily even deal with those. And so if this is true for all carbon deposits, then this would actually help the geologist. Because if the carbon deposits came from fossilized remains of plants, then ultimately petroleum may have come from fossilized remains of plants. But either way, this is kind of irrelevant because we are like, well, sure, some may have been formed from these remains of plants, but others, the ones that were specifically formed from the beginning of the earth, those may have been the ones that this person is talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Alrighty. Any other questions on petroleum and bacteria? Okay.